Vibe shift this week. This is another special bi-coastal episode of Haunted Hollywood Hour. I'm joined by Molly Mullin, who is coming to us from Knoxville, Tennessee. Molly is a producer and photographer who's worked on some true crime TV shows that have been filmed in Knoxville. And you have a new history and politics podcast with your historian friend, Patrick O'Neill, which is a conversation between two friends to help make sense of where we find ourselves in American politics today. That's so important, and how American history can inform and prepare us for what's next. And what's it called?
Yeah, it's called Unfreak Me Out. Basically, I'm going to freak out about something of the week, and I'm going to call up my friend Patrick, and he's going to give me some historical perspective. You know, he's not going to totally calm me down. Maybe it's something that we should be freaked out about, but it is something that can give us some perspective, you know, during these times.
So you're going to share a very spooky history of one of your city's most haunted buildings, right?
Yep.
And I found a very delightful connection between the building that you're going to talk about and a very famous Hollywood landmark called the Magic Castle, which is a famous mansion on Franklin Avenue in Hollywood. That's a venue and a clubhouse for magicians.
We talked about the Magic Castle in a bunch of different shows and movies. So to me, that like looms large.
I'm really looking forward to hearing about the Bijou Theater in Knoxville. And before we get to that, though, because I always want to ask people, what's the spookiest thing that's happened to you recently? Do you have any stories?
Nothing like overt, but I did see a children's, like a lone child's shoe on a country road the other day.
That's
terrifying. That's always really spooky. Yeah, I'm always like, did someone drop it? Is the child okay? What happened to the child? Why is there only one shoe? I'm sure it's a totally normal, explanation. But whenever I see that, I'm always freaked out. So it's pretty fucking creepy.
But there is a thing, where people have found random shoes on the road with feet in them.
In my hometown of Sioux City, Iowa, there was a famous plane crash. I think it was in 1989. And it's famous because actually a lot of people survived it. But a friend of mine, her dad was a photographer for the local newspaper. And I was in junior high when it happened. And I remember her telling me the story of her dad walking around in the cornfield and saw a shoe. And I guess he kicked it or something, and he realized it was someone's foot in the shoe.
That went a completely different direction than I was planning on going. Thank you for that story. I love that story. It's so creepy.
Yeah.
That image, just a shoe with a foot in a cornfield. That's like the beginning of a horror movie. I love it. But I was going to say what actually happens, why you people find feet in shoes on roadways and things is, especially on freeways, is people when they die by suicide by jumping off of a freeway overpass onto the freeway below, their body gets torn apart by trucks and cars and things. Yeah. And sometimes their feet will get stuck underneath the undercarriage of like a semi-truck. And then that semi-truck will go long distances and then eventually drop the foot. And so that's why occasionally people find random shoes with feet in them at various places.
So it's like the Johnny Appleseed of dropping shoes along. That's fucking insane.
Horrifying.
It's very tragic and sad. I love that story.
We want to get into the spooky haunted stuff with the Bijou. What's that early history of Knoxville like?
So the Cherokee were a big nation in the region in Knoxville and Georgia, North Carolina, and it was a huge tribe. And they were considered a two-part society, those who practiced religion and healing, and those who practiced warfare. So they had a peace chief and a war chief. We still have the Cherokee Nation in Cherokee, North Carolina, but famously, there was a horrific part of American history that started in this area. It's a land of, beautiful music, banjos, mandolins, the blues, and we have a lot of difficult history with the Trail of Tears. This is something I didn't know about the Trail of Tears, which was what caused it, which is gold was discovered in Georgia on Cherokee land. And suddenly all the friendly, handshaky support for the tribe went away. And imagine, right? A small number of Cherokee ceded the tribal land to the U.S., all Cherokee land east of the Mississippi, for $5 million, which is a lot of money at the time. But that's the thing. Like, most tribal members of the Cherokee Nation did not want the treaty, and they took their case to the Supreme Court and they won. So the Supreme Court sided with the Cherokee Nation. They were like, this is not a good deal. Most of the Cherokee tribe doesn't support it, so we're not going to let it go through. However, President Andrew Jackson and Georgia officials refused to enforce the Supreme Court's ruling. And so Congress, including then Tennessee Congressman Davy Crockett, he's had definitely like a whitewashed history, but Davy Crockett was one of the people that helped pass the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which forced the tribal members from their homes and territory. I think it just shows me and shows all of us that there are ways that when people are really determined to get around the laws of the U.S., get around the Constitution, get around legal rulings, they can. And we've seen this. We're seeing this these days. We've seen it for a while. And so the Eviction and Forced March, which is now known as the Trail of Tears, took place in the fall and winter of 1838 and 1839. So around 60,000 Cherokee, along with the members of other tribes, including Choctaw, Seminole, Chickasaw, and Muskogee nations, among others, and also some Black slaves and freed people, were forced to walk from the Smokies and the Blue Ridge Mountains to Arkansas and Oklahoma that winter. About 4,000 Cherokee and around 16,000 Indigenous Americans in total died on the 116-day journey, many because the escorting troops refused to slow or stop so that the ill and exhausted could recover. And they also made the tribal nations pay for their access across, private rivers and land. They had to, so they got $5 million, but then they had to pay to travel. And I don't know if
that's
they had
a scam. Oh my God.
Yeah. And again, it was in the winter. And so most, I just think about like the people in the Holocaust in Europe, being forced to walk out of Dachau concentration camp to another concentration camp so they can move the prisoners. And people were dying, and they would just fall down dead, and they would, have all kinds of diseases. That's the kind of thing that happened here.
Oh my God. It doesn't get taught hardly at all in school.
No.
And so that brings us to Knoxville.
Okay. So, and again, Knoxville's the home of Dolly Parton. I live a half hour away from Dollywood, which is the best theme park in the country. And it's very classy, actually. It's very beautiful and clean. It's a wonderful place. I recommend everybody go. I mean, the Smokies are gorgeous. Knoxville's often referred to as the cradle of country music. And it has kind of like an industrial working class vibe. And the Tennessee River winds through the town. Okay, so when you first reached out to me about coming on your podcast for this, I was at this New Year's Eve concert, this like fundraiser for our local live music club, the Pilot Light, which is kind of like the heart of our kind of, indie music scene here. And so I was at the show, and I just you texted me, and I just happened to be sitting across from this guy called Eric Dawson, who happens to be Knox County's official historian and who's the McClung Historical Collection Manager at the Knox County Public Library. So I just happened to be sitting across from the guy who might have some good information. And so I was like, hey, I might go on this podcast. I don't know much about this. Do you have any suggestions? Like, I know there's a really interesting ghost history, haunted history of Knoxville. Do you have any suggestions of any stories or any places? And he said 3 words: the Bijou Theater.
See, that's the wonderful synchronicity that happens when we talk about spooky stuff.
Yeah, it's a beautiful theater. So the Bijou Theater is the 3rd oldest building in Knoxville. The Lamar House at 805 South Gay Street was built by Thomas Humes in 1815. And so when he died, his wife, Margaret Russell Cohen, took over. The Lamar House Hotel, I think it was called, housed, interestingly enough, President Andrew Jackson was the first of 5 U.S. presidents to stay at the hotel. Andrew Jackson.
Maybe we could go there and do some sort of seance to make his ghost suffer and pay for his crimes.
Fuck yeah. I think there's like an Andrew Jackson birth house, like where he was born is near here too. I mean, you should come here. We'll get some witchy shit going. And I don't personally know this, but I would imagine that because Knoxville actually has such a huge connection to Ireland and Scotland and England, I bet there's a lot of like Wiccan, Celtic witches here too, like actively.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in 1909, the ballroom of the hotel was transformed into the Bijou Theater. So we're talking about the Lamar House Hotel, but that's also basically what the Bijou Theater is now. The New York Times praised the Bijou as one of the best sounding rooms in the country. The Bijou has seen performers such as Tallulah Bankhead, Dizzy Gillespie, John Barrymore, and of course, Dolly Parton. And I think I've seen a lot of really good music there. I've seen a lot of really good comics come through there. It's still like a big place that people love to see shows. And it's a beautiful theater. So in 1909, C.B. Atkins, a furniture maker, bought the hotel and transformed the ballroom into the Bijou Theater. And at the time, 1909 in the South, theaters were segregated. White people could only go to white theaters and Black people could only go to Black theaters. So because Atkins constructed a second balcony, Black audiences could watch the same show from the balcony as white audiences. The second balcony is only accessible from a side street.
This just kind of blew my mind because there was a news story about this, like, oh, look how good this theater was integrated back in the day. But it's really not integrated because the Black audiences have to enter from a completely separate entrance. And then they have to sit in the nosebleed section.
Well, and why do you think Elvis Presley, another Tennessean, became so famous so easily? I mean, he was a fan of the blues and jazz and all of that. And, I think he was a genuine performer, but he also was someone who could easily perform. And his Black counterpart had a harder time. They might be able to be on stage, but they'd have to go through the alley and they wouldn't be able to stay in the same hotel. Dizzy Gillespie, I mentioned, performed at the Bijou. It would have been during a time when this theater was still segregated. It's another one of those things where I'm able to live here as I don't know if you could tell, a white woman. And I think about it. I see Confederate flags. I care about people. But most of the time I don't really have to think about it. And when you really do think about this, it's appalling. It gives you kind of like the same kind of vibes you might get in learning about South African history, learning about colonialism. I mean, it's just awful. But at the time, it was considered progressive. I mean, that's the other thing that, it was easier living in Iowa. And I used to live in New York. I've lived, in the North. We can kind of pat ourselves in the back and be like, oh, we're great. We didn't have to deal with that kind of history. But a lot of people still stood by and allowed it to happen for a long time. And this is just where it did happen. And again, that's part of history that you can remember was a very real part of our history not that long ago. And maybe not this exact version of something might happen soon, but versions of this are happening. And it teaches you, if you think that you're the kind of person that wouldn't have been okay with it back then you need to not be okay with it now.
Yeah.
And you need to stand up for people that are vulnerable.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I thought this was really interesting. So in the 1930s, Paramount Pictures, again, to our connection to LA, Paramount Pictures showed second run movies and hosted various performances while owning the building. And in the 50s, the building was renamed the Bijou Art Theater. The sole purpose was showing adult films.
Now, as I was working on this document too, I found the date was 1965 was when.
I think you're right. I think it was 1965 to 75. I think the 50s, the building was renamed, but I think that maybe the adult film element might not have really come into play until 1965, like you said. The rest of the Lamar House Hotel became a halfway home for transients and sex workers. So eventually, I think it was in the mid-'80s, people got some money together and they restored the Bijou Theater to its former glory. And that's when we started hearing a lot of stories about hauntings.
Let's hear about those hauntings.
Yeah.
Have there been any murders or deaths in the building?
Yeah. So at the start of the Civil War, the building was converted into a hospital for both Confederate and Union soldiers.
That must have been awkward.
Right? Sorry, guys. I shot you, and now we're both here. Knoxville was originally on the Union side, but in 1861, it was taken over by the Confederacy. I don't know if Tennessee was completely Confederate, but there's just a history where Tennessee and East Tennessee really resisted being part of the Confederacy until after the Civil War began. And it's interesting because, I could drive 5 minutes from here and see, a Trump flag and a
Confederate flag. I was going to say, now it seems like Tennessee is very pro-Confederacy.
Yeah, I don't mean to say this in a condescending way, but it's a fact that public schools in Tennessee and a lot of the South taught a really skewed version. So that's about the stories that happened after the Civil War. But yeah, Tennessee was, at least Knoxville was Union until 1861, until it was forced to become Confederate. A lot of people in Knoxville didn't want to support Confederacy. And that's, I'm sure that's very complicated. That could be another podcast. It could be one of my podcasts. We'll talk about it then, and then I'll bring you on and we can talk about that.
I'll just ask questions because I have no idea what it's like in the South.
Again, like I've lived here. I'm not the best representative of the South in a way because I didn't grow up here, but I am someone who is kind of a carpetbagger, but I've lived here long enough to, have an outsider's view on it. And I lived in North Carolina for a decade before. So, it's complicated. I'll just say it's a lot more complicated than you probably would think. But anyway, so yeah, the ghost of General Sanders. Okay. All right. So I talked about how Knoxville, was taken over by the Confederacy. Union Brigadier General William P. Sanders was shot by a Confederate sharpshooter during the siege of Knoxville, which was a battle just west of where downtown Knoxville is today. He was taken to the hospital at the Lamar House Hotel and later died of his wounds at the hotel's bridal suite. Many visitors and performers and workers at the Bijou claim that they've seen a man dressed in a Civil War uniform standing on the balcony, which is where the bridal suite was previously located.
And I watched a video that basically the balcony the third floor balcony, that is where the Black audiences were allowed to come in through the side. That balcony used to be the bridal suite. And so they had paranormal investigators come in and take photos. And a lot of paranormal investigators notice a ball of light at a certain spot, which kind of lines up to where the bridal suite was.
Yeah. And I think really that cool. You mentioned from your research that people sort of saw it out the corner of their eye. And General Sanders has a huge history in Knoxville. They named Fort Sanders after him. There was a Battle of Fort Sanders that happened a week after he died. And they named that after him. And Fort Sanders is a really big neighborhood in the UT campus area. So it's obviously symbolically important to a lot of people in Knoxville. And it's pretty fascinating that that's probably the most noted ghost of the Bijou Theater.
Very cool.
And also, he was a bachelor at the time of his death, but he was dating Sue Boyd, who was a Knoxville relative of Confederate spy Belle Boyd.
He was a Union general.
He was a Union. Yep. The reason I mentioned this is because the Boyd name is actually really well known in Knoxville. One of Belle Boyd's descendants is Randy Boyd, who owns a lot of properties in Knoxville, and he's the current president of the University of Tennessee.
Oh, wow.
And he ran for governor of Tennessee a couple of years back.
Wow.
I have a friend, my friend Courtney is actually the director of the Bijou Theater, and I read an article where she was talking about how her office is allegedly just filled with spirits.
Oh, wow.
And she hears all kinds of stuff. She's surrounded by it. And I don't know how she works with that.
What kind of stuff does she hear?
She's had moments where, she's working there alone at night and something might move or a door might be open that wasn't supposed to be open, things like that. If I can, I'll see if I can get her to maybe record an audio of her experience if we can. But I'll just say that, people I personally know that are legitimate people have legitimate human, but people that are just normal people that aren't necessarily woo woo all the time. They've seen stuff and they've heard stuff. Cool. And so it kind of aligns with a lot of stories we've seen. Yeah, there's another ghost in the Bijou. Paranormal investigators believe that a spirit of a small child has been seen there, perhaps one that died during the hotel years. She appears as a tiny but terrifying apparition that haunts the women's bathroom on the second floor.
Oh, Moaning Myrtle.
Yeah, like a moaning myrtle. And I read this story and now I'm like, why haven't I been to the women's bathroom on the second floor? I need to check it out. I can go there and see.
Yes.
Yeah. And then the third very famous ghost of the Bijou is allegedly from a man that was killed there. His name is Thomas Atkins. This is in 1876. Thomas Atkins, the operator of the Atkins Hotel, which is across the street from the Lamar House Hotel. At the time, it was the second best hotel in Knoxville. And obviously, the Lamar House Hotel was the first best hotel in Knoxville at the time. He got
interestingly, the name Atkins is pinging something for me because C.B. Atkins is the person that bought the hotel and then put in the Bijou Theater. So I wonder if there is a relationship between C.B. Atkins and this Thomas Atkins fellow.
I didn't look that part up, but I absolutely would believe that that must be the reason why C.B. Atkins did what he did. I bet this is part of his legacy. So I'm sure this was a famous story even in the early 1900s. So what happened was Thomas Atkins was running this hotel across the street. His competing hotel, the Lamar House Hotel, was run by Thomas Sneed, who operated the Lamar House Hotel and was a relative of the former owner, William Sneed, who created, I believe he was the guy that created the Lamar House Hotel. Those two were bitter rivals. And one evening he stumbled into the Bijou looking for a drink and they got into a fight and Sneed shot him after a big argument. Despite being in a room full of witnesses, Thomas Sneed was able to claim self-defense in his killing of Thomas Atkins. People believe that it is Thomas Atkins's spirit that can be heard stumbling around hallways late at night, searching for a glass of water and peace. Apparently he was looking for a glass of water when he was shot. And apparently if you hear odd noises at the Bijou, pour a glass of water and the noises should stop.
Oh, wow. Dang.
Yeah, I know. I've never done that. I've never poured a glass of water there. I've only ever imbibed other kinds of spirit at the Bijou during shows, but I love that story. And you found some Reddit posts. There are people in Knoxville or who've visited the Bijou Theater that have, talked about different weird experiences they've had there. One person said that they sat in the balcony for a not very well attended show and they got the chills. Another person worked at the bistro. It's called the Bistro at the Bijou. It has a really great brunch. This person said that they worked there for almost a year and they're very excited because they were like a big fan of ghosts. And during the time that they worked there, they heard their name whispered.
Nice.
They heard their name whispered and they felt someone touch their back when there was no one behind them. And their bartender had another creepy, couple of creepy stories, apparently glasses flying off the bar. I love that.
Very cool. Uh-oh, I think I lost power. Hello, everyone. This is a slight time skip because as we were recording, we had a windstorm, my power went out, and then you may have heard LA was victim to, and still is victim to, an enormous wildfire disaster. And it's still ongoing. I'm currently safe, so I'm carrying on with recording this, but it's been very tragic and terrible. But that's not going to stop us from making art. So we are going to continue talking about the Bijou. I'm going to talk about the Magic Castle, which, by the way, the Magic Castle is doing a little community effort to help those who've been victimized by the wildfire. They are holding a collection donation drive. And on Tuesday, January 14th, they're going to have a big ol' event in their parking lot, distributing sandwiches and chips and cookies. And there's going to be magicians there who are going to bring joy to anyone who comes by and needs stuff. And then folks can drop off donation items like gift cards and blankets and food to their Magic Castle Donation Center anytime between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. on Tuesday, January 4th. So that's really nice of them. Now let's go back to the Bijou. And Molly, now that you've learned everything that you've learned about the Bijou, what's your plan?
Well, I've lived here for over a decade now, and I've heard about some really cool ghost tours that friends have gone on in town. I know that we have like a really rich history, and I'm bummed that I haven't done it yet. So I am going to make sure that I take advantage of that now. Talking about all these stories has definitely gotten me going, and I would like to see firsthand, what it's like to go into the Bijou now and check out the third story balcony and see if I could see a dude in a Civil War uniform, and maybe I'll give him a glass of water. And if I end up going on any of these tours or going personally to the Bijou especially and see anything fascinating, I will send you videos and
Yay! Yeah. So the connection between the Magic Castle and the Bijou. They're both buildings that were built in 1909. And one of the performers who performed at the Bijou and then spent the last part of his life performing at the Magic Castle is Harry Blackstone Sr. He is a man who, after Harry Houdini died, became America's most famous magician. And Harry Blackstone Sr. was born Harry Boutin in 1885 Chicago. And when he's just 8 years old, he gets a magic trick for his birthday present. And did you ever get magic tricks when you were a little kid?
I think that my brother might have had, one of those little trick books, and I probably looked at it as a kid, but I don't think I had the attention span to really master something like that. But I definitely find it fascinating.
Yeah. So I got like a how to do magic book when I was a little kid. And I got the little magic card boxes where you can put a card in a box and make the card disappear and things like that. And I was, I had like a little phase when I was in elementary school of being really into magic. But then, you grow out of those phases. And I love that Harry stuck with it and it became his whole identity. And I think it had to do with Harry's father was really supportive of him. He could have been a dick. He could have been like, magic's not real. Blah, 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 get a real job.
Yeah.
But he actually nourishes Harry's interest in magic. He suggests to Harry that he check out magic books at the local library. And that's how Harry starts learning these new tricks. And at 16 years old, Harry debuts his first performance in a church basement. And at the time, magicians would either focus on sleight of hand moves or build these large apparatuses needed for large stage shows like the cut a woman in half device and the disappearing bird cage and things like that. But Harry decided to learn both. And while he's learning, he gets work as a cabinet maker, which helps him learn how to build his own props. And in 1904, Harry and his brother Pete put on a vaudeville act called, you'll love this title, Straight and Crooked Magic, which I feel like there could be a
streets.
Yeah, there could be a spin-off show, which is called like Straight and Queer Magic. It's like a straight guy and a queer guy or woman, whatever. And they do magic together and they constantly are making jokes.
I would love that. And yeah, like jokes and like silly commentary and society and things like that. I love social commentary magic.
Perfect. So for a while, Harry and his brother Pete are doing this magic vaudeville show. Then World War I looms and their Germanic name, there's like a little bit of diciness around it. So they change their name to Blackstone and head to Los Angeles. And that's when Harry sees his idol, the Great Keller. And when Harry was growing up, when he was just 8 years old, he would see these giant color lithograph posters all over of the Great Keller, who was the magician at the time. And when he's in Los Angeles, the Great Keller, his childhood idol, sees his show for the first time. Can you imagine?
Wow.
And
that's insane.
They become friends.
Yeah.
And I love that.
God.
About 30 at this point.
It just sounds like he's been working really, really hard and supported by people. It sounds like he has a very positive beginning of life story where he really has been supported, and then he gets to meet and become friends with his hero.
He becomes friends with his childhood hero who shows him some of his own tricks, and they incorporate his tricks into their show. And the Blackstone Magic Show becomes famous. They have a number of incredible effects. The vanishing bird cage, which is a trick that involves the bird cage like instantly collapsing on a elastic band and then shooting up the magician's sleeve, the dancing handkerchief effect, the floating light bulb effect, and countless others. In 1942, Harry performs what his website calls the vanishing audience. And in Decatur, Illinois, during a performance, he announces that his next trick audience is so large that members of the audience, you will need to go outside to view this on the street. And everyone exits row by row, very orderly. orderly. And when they reach the street, the crowd learns why Blackstone had told them to go outside, because the theater was on fire. And because Blackstone was so cool and calm and collected, he got everyone to safety. And he did it in a very Mr. Rogers sort of way.
Wait, are you telling me that? No, okay. You're telling me that he didn't like set the place on fire because he was doing a crazy trick and he was a psycho. The place happened to be on fire, and so he presented it calmly as, we're going to do a vanishing audience thing. Go outside and see it. Oh, so he kept everybody calm.
Yes, he handled it in a very teacherly, good father way.
That's amazing.
And turned
because there've been absolutely, like, through all of time, there've been stampedes in theaters and places like that where something like that happened. That's, a classic, like, hardcore, really high level performer. He seems like a cool guy,
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I like him.
And at 65 years old, Harry stops touring and he settles in Hollywood, and he makes countless TV appearances while in Hollywood, and he performs almost exclusively at the Magic Castle. And then on November 16th, 1965, Harry passes away in Hollywood. His body is sent to Michigan for burial at Lakeside Cemetery in Collin, Michigan, which is one of his former home cities. And a main street there is actually renamed Blackstone Avenue in his honor. And using many of his father's props, his son, Harry Blackstone Jr., starts making a name for himself as a renowned magician. A really sad story. Harry Blackstone Jr.'s son, who is Harry Blackstone Sr.'s grandchild, Harry Bouton Blackstone III is his name. And he attended high school at Redlands High School. And at a young age, he was just a very talented magician. And I'm sure also benefited from a little nepotism. But he got to perform for Liberace. And in 1972, at the age of 14, he performed at President Richard Nixon's inauguration.
Wow.
Yes.
His inauguration, not just like a private performance. Like he
performed at 14 years old.
14. Crazy. That's amazing.
And he later performed for the King of Jordan, King Hussein of Jordan as well. But what's really sad, when he's only 25, he dies suddenly and tragically in 1984 in Santa Rosa. He's just randomly helping a friend. He's like working on a truck, doing auto mechanic things, and then the bed of a dump truck falls on him and crushes him. It's really sad.
That's awful.
I know.
When I think about hearing ghost stories or stories of murders and killings and stuff, I didn't expect to hear a story of just like some really nice guys. And like his grandpa sounded like a really nice guy who just had a huge talent and passion and lived a decent life. And I'm sure he was like beloved at the Magic Castle. And then for his grandson to be able to, at 14 to perform in a presidential inauguration, and then to be helping somebody and just have something horrible happen. That's so tragic.
So Gay Blackstone, who is the wife of Harry Blackstone Sr., who passed away, and the grandmother of Harry Blackstone's grandson, who passed away, was on season 10 of Pawn Stars. And the birdcage prop used by both Harry Sr. and Harry Jr. for $2,600, which actually surprised me because that seemed like really inexpensive. For like a legendary magician and his iconic prop to have it sold for $2,600. Exactly. So the same year, the Bijou Theater was added to Lamar House Hotel. 1909, a wealthy banker and real estate investor named Roland B. Lane, that is his name, Roland B. Lane, builds a Gothic...
Especially if he's real estate investor.
Yeah, he's Roland. He builds a Gothic Renaissance chateau for him and his wife. And it's one of the first homes in Hollywood. And Hollywood is a municipality which incorporated just 7 years prior in 1903. And Roland calls it Holly Chateau. It's a 17-room mansion with a roof garden and sun parlor, and it happens to be a near exact duplicate of a house that was built in 1897 called Kimberly Crest House and Gardens in Redlands, California. And I thought the Redlands connection was really interesting because Harry Blackstone's grandson went to high school in Redlands, and the duplicate of the Magic Castle, which is the house where Harry spent his retirement years, is in Redlands. I don't know the connection, but it seems cosmic. And just
I was going to say, I'm waiting for you to read me their horoscopes. But that
I know. I wish I had.
I don't know what their signs are.
I don't have more birth details. I couldn't find like exact birthdays or anything like that, but I also didn't look hard enough. So that's on me. But if you're interested, by the way, the name Hollywood comes from this woman, Deirdre Wilcox, who was a businesswoman who founded Hollywood and became known as the mother of Hollywood. And she chose the name because a random man mentioned that he had an estate in Illinois named Hollywood. And she's like, that's a nice name. And she likes Holly because she's superstitious and she says it brings good luck. And I love the idea that Hollywood was just named because it had nice vibes. And also that there's a little bit of superstitious element because everyone in Hollywood is a witch. And we're all like, collecting things like plants and crystals and everything and doing all that nonsense.
And also just like, it just felt right, man.
It just felt right.
And it has like a woo-woo element. Yeah.
Yeah.
It just felt right, man. Just got to vibe it.
Yeah. And she actually died in 1914. And there's a street called Wilcox Avenue, which is a very heavily used street. Although it's it's very cracked and full of potholes, but it's called Wilcox Avenue. It's named after her. But in 1940, Roland, the dude who built this beautiful castle-looking Gothic house in Hollywood, he dies. And then in 1945, his wife also dies. And the castle gets turned into a multi-family home with different apartments. And then it becomes a home for the elderly. And in 1955, a guy named Thomas O. Glover buys the building from the family. And by the 1960s, the building is really shitty. It falls into disrepair. It's just kind of hasn't been maintained at all. And a writer named Milt Larson, who works on the NBC show Truth or Consequences. He's actually has an office kind of across the street, kind of looking over this Gothic castle. And he's like, I love the vibes. I would too. I would be like, that building is not getting taken care of. And it like looks so cool and got turrets and it's got Gothic vibes to it. I want it. And he actually, because everyone in Hollywood is like a big woo-woo person. His father is a renowned magician and his brother also is a magician. So this writer Milt goes to the owner of this building and says, hey, can we turn this building that's really dilapidated into a private club for magicians, which is probably the most random request he'd ever gotten in his life.
Yeah, that sounds, again, it sounds very LA. You know, I got some friends here. We want to have a private club. We're going to do magic. It's just so completely random. I love that. And did you say this was like one of the first houses built in Hollywood?
Yeah, it was one of the first
first mansions.
Yeah, one of the first buildings built in Hollywood at all. Yeah. And a crew of friends and volunteers then start restoring the mansion. And finally, so it takes, I think, about a year for everything to kind of come together. And then finally at 5 p.m., January 2nd, 1963. So I could technically do a birth chart for the Magic Castle. The Magic Castle opens its doors, billing itself as the most unusual private club in the world. So we do know that it's a Capricorn. Yes. So the Magic Castle is a Capricorn. And only those.
So Capricorn is one of the ones I don't know very much about. I think they're helpers. I think they're helpful, but that's all I know.
They tend to be very ambitious. They tend to be a little bit conservative, a little bit old school. Well, they're very set in their ways because they're Saturnian. So they can be all about wanting to build like stone. It feels like a very Capricornian thing. Mm-hmm. The fact that the building is made out of stone and brick is very Capricornian. And then also the Magic Castle itself and the Magic Club is a big time sausage fest because there is a very old boys club, white guy vibe to the magic community. And if I have a chance,
I'm not surprised.
Kind of talk about some issues there. But the cool thing is only those who are members of this organization that was founded by Milt the writer's brother, Bill Larson, the Academy of the Magical Arts, are allowed to attend this castle. And there are now about 5,000 members of the Academy of Magical Arts. And Thomas O. Glover's family still owns the building. So to become a member of the Academy of Magical Arts, there's a whole process that you have to go through. You have to take a test. You have to prove that you are a legit magician. You have to do an audition, whole process. And I came across a really great LAist article that addresses some of the patriarchal issues that I talked about. It follows a non-binary magician named Carly Usden, who is accepted into the Academy of Magical Arts and then becomes very disillusioned by the sexism and the fact that they are excluded. They and other people who are not cis men find themselves excluded from getting booked in the better rooms and getting booked regularly. It's a really great 4-part series, but I'll share some of the highlights. To become a magician member requires an application with an essay and an audition. And in 2019...
is a magician member, I apologize, is a magician member someone who gets to perform there as well?
Yes. Yeah.
Like it's a members only club where you can like go and maybe bring a guest to watch those shows, right? Or is it all about the members or just the people that can perform?
Yeah. So in order to even like go and attend a show there, you need to be a guest of a member of the club. Yeah. And so in 2019, magician membership was only 12% women. And I saw this quote from the LAist article from a Magic Castle member named Angela Sanchez. And I love this. And she says, in a patriarchal society, for women to know something that men do not is a bad thing. And so to be accused of being a witch is to be accused of having secret knowledge that a man does not have access to. And so this notion that a witch, a woman who holds power, is adverse to what women should and ought to be is something that cues you in to how women in magic are generally treated in Western European societies. And I thought that was profound.
Yeah, because I was just thinking, I don't know of a single female magician, like someone who's a legit magician that, you know, does it more than just like a random little trick. I've never seen one. I don't know if it's odd that there's only 17% or 12% of women members, because I imagine there probably aren't that many women that do magic anyway, or at least not at that level. But to me, that makes sense that there is a reason for that. And a reason why women aren't really encouraged to do that, or might not be inclined to be, because historically we were burned at the stake for doing anything vaguely powerful without the need of men.
And certainly like Harry was encouraged to from a young age, from his parents, from his father. And, you know, I remember as a child, I had like a general passing interest in magic, but I didn't see women magicians, and I certainly wasn't encouraged to pursue magic. So there isn't that push.
And that can make it all the difference.
Yes, it
really can.
It really can. Being able to see someone who looks like you, who is like you, doing the thing, and then also getting the encouragement to go do the thing. And there's a story that one person tells in this article about she's a member, she's setting up her tricks in a parlor, and another magician member comes over and asks her for a drink, thinking that she's the bartender. And she says, "No, I'm not a bartender. I'm going to put on a show." And this magician who is a member says, "What's a little lady like you doing magic for?" And then leaves and doesn't even stay to watch her show. And another story is Carly, after becoming a member of the Magic Castle, succeeding at their audition, really excited, telling all their friends about it. They hold a queer party, which is called Houdini's Seance, at the Magic Castle for friends. And
I would love that. That sounds fantastic.
I know.
That sounds so much fun. And it sounds like something that could, like, again, sorry to interrupt the story, but I think that there's absolutely like a very weird invisible wall that seems to keep other people from like engaging with magic on that level. And I think that if you had more queer magicians or women, like the whole vibe of the magic scene in general and the kinds of stuff that they could do with it could explode and make it so much more fascinating than just the kind of standard fare that you normally see. Really, because I love, I'm not really interested in a classic magic show, but I love something that that takes magic and does something new with it, which is.
And at this party, they asked specifically for a woman magician, but the Magic Castle booked a male magician for their queer party instead. And that male magician misgendered everyone in the room. And while they were doing their standard fare, told sexist and insensitive jokes just because that's part of his routine. And you might notice a lot of magical routines are based on things like using women as props, making just kind of like offhand sexist jokes. And sexism is baked into a lot of the performances. There used to be a dress code up until just a few years ago. And when I went, I remember seeing this dress code. Women were supposed to wear ravishing dresses and men were supposed to wear suits. And it very specifically said women and men, no other genders are listed. And that was really interesting. But if you wore a suit and you go to the Magic Castle, you'd automatically be called sir. And so Carly, being a non-binary person, would go to the castle dressed in a suit and just would get used to being called sir. And after 5 years as a member, because of all the microaggressions and also just not getting booked in the good rooms and not getting booked regularly, just stopped going. And their friend Kayla.
And again, that's just a huge lost opportunity.
Yeah.
For the kind of, I just think that when there's more people involved in a thing and more people with different perspectives, it only ever adds to the art expanding and becoming things that people didn't imagine because they didn't realize they were so used to one thing and another thing. So sorry, I get upset about this stuff. That's deeply annoying. And I see that, like, I've been doing a little bit of stand-up and I've seen some of that in local stand-up scenes. And there's people that are very, very welcoming. And there is some diversity in certain spaces. In Knoxville, I see that there's actually pretty good amount of diversity in some of these spaces, but a lot of them are mostly dudes and straight dudes mostly.
Performing
and the sets are very, but it's getting a lot better in Knoxville, especially. I love the comedy scene here, and there's all kinds of people that are doing it now. But, like a few years back, it was just very much just a bunch of guys.
Yeah. Carly's friend Kayla talks about experiencing a lot of sexism and harassment, and even was physically assaulted by 2 different male magicians. And a third male magician actually followed her out to her car. So because of all this, she started making a spreadsheet showing the castle had a disparity in how they booked female versus male magicians. And between 2016 to 2019, the percentage of women performers grew. It used to be about 6%. In 2016, it grew to 9%, which crazy low. But the spreadsheet showed that where performers were booked and which times, women tended to get the less prestigious slots like brunches and early shows instead of the evening shows. So she does the presentation with the spreadsheets to the Magic Castle. And the Magic Castle then, according to this article, said that they were going to make an effort to book at least one woman per week, as well as magicians from underrepresented backgrounds. But they didn't address the time slots or the locations. And we're
going to give you what we can. You know what I mean? Stop asking for too much, ladies.
Yeah.
Ladies and theys. Just take what we're going to give you. Don't worry about it.
And then
that's so, again, it's so tedious. It's tedious because then they can say that they did something, but they didn't really address.
So there were other problems, like in 2020, during the George Floyd demonstrations, which were huge in LA, the Magic Castle posted a photo of an army truck in front of the castle, like defending the castle, and with the caption that said, "Tonight our hearts are with the business owners and employees whose livelihoods have been destroyed," which was quite a white man statement there.
Yeah.
Magic Castle. And so
it's like equating property damage to violence against people or animals. That's so absurd. Okay, so how did that go down?
So Carly screenshotted that and tweeted it with some choice words. And that led to a whole big old thing. And people in Carly's comments started sharing their stories of racism and sexism at the Magic Castle. And because of that, 2 men filed a grievance against Carly, and they had to pay the Magic Castle $50 to file this grievance. And that meant that Carly had to go to a hearing on whether she would be allowed to remain a member of the Magic Castle for, bringing all this controversy onto the castle. And so Carly wanted to make sure those 2 men lost their $50. Carly eventually won the hearing, but found out that they wouldn't be allowed on the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And disheartened by that, at the end of 2021, Carly stopped paying their dues.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be that hard. You know what I mean? Like people don't have to fight back that hard. They don't need to make life so complicated for everybody else. If they didn't have that kind of backlash, completely unnecessary backlash, they could have been welcomed in and they could have made the place better. They would have made the place better. Diversity just inherently makes, not just because it exists, but when people are creating art and creating, new things, that makes something so much more rich. And it's a shame that Carly had to fight tooth and nail in 2018, 2019, and then still get kind of treated like shit because they're the ones that were trying to make something better for everybody. So that's a shame.
As part of all of this backlash, in 2020, the LA Times published an investigation into all of the sexism and racism at the Magic Castle. There's a woman that describes how she was called up on stage by a performer who touched her chest during a trick. And a cook said that racial epithets were common in the kitchen. And Kayla, who was Carly's friend, who we talked about earlier, talked about how there's a staircase in the Magic Castle. And if you sit underneath it, you can look up people's skirts as they're walking up the stairs. And
fantastic.
Yeah.
That's just great.
Big old, but this whole
and they're
dressed
sounds ravishingly with their ravishing skirts and ravish someone. Sorry. That's just so, it definitely does. I've heard it is definitely like an old boys club, but it's just gross that it's still, or at least in 2020, that it was still like that. 2020.
Yeah. So since then, Kayla has been accepted onto the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And Kayla personally rewrote the dress code. So if you go to the Magic Castle website and you look up the dress code, you can see that it's not sexist anymore. It's referring to people, and it's referring to, these are the things that you can wear, these are things that you cannot wear. It doesn't gender divide the attire. It's a lot better. And still though, Kayla moved to Chicago, no longer in Hollywood, and performs at a place called the Chicago Magic Lounge. And this sounds like a very diversity utopia as far as magic goes. There's signs posted everywhere that tell you what to do if you want to report bad behavior. There's team meetings that remind people to use non-binary and gender inclusive language when you're performing. And then when something does happen, like a drunk guest or someone gets handsy, the guest is immediately asked to leave. What a concept. So things sound a lot better there. Things sound like they're getting better at the Magic Castle. And I'm looking forward to continuing to follow the Magic Castle. It looks like they're doing a lot of great things for the wildfire victims right now with doing their donation drive and bringing a little joy to those who need help by doing magic shows for them. So that sounds really
And maybe they like, symbolically are doing like a version of what Harry did by helping walk people out to safety, using sleight of hand to distract people towards, good stuff in the midst of something so awful. Yeah, I've just been thinking about all the LA institutions. I've only visited LA like once for a few hours even, but like I have a lot of friends there and that have lived there for a long time, and I just, heart's going out to everybody there. And hopefully the winds die down.
Yeah.
Things can start to heal.
Well, the winds are expected to pick up again Tuesday, so we will see what Tuesday brings. But if you ever want to visit LA, you're welcome to stay at my place. That is, if I still have a place come next week. We're both holding our thumbs up, like, yeah.
And if you guys need if you become a refugee from LA, let me know. And people here are very generous and they'd love to help out. So,
that's nice to know.
You can come have some moonshine, play banjo, watch some true crime TV shows, and talk shit about patriarchal systems.
Excellent.
You do that all in Tennessee. Yeah.
So let's wrap things up. Molly, what are you working on? What are you looking forward to?
Well, we're just recording our second episode of the new podcast I'm working on called Unfreak Me Out. The new episode is about billionaires, and we definitely have a lot to talk about. So I do think in the end, it's going to be a lot of fun, and hopefully it'll help make people feel a little less alone and give them some perspective. So I'll be posting all of that stuff out on my social. Right now, my social media is mainly on Blue Sky, which I recommend to everybody. And on Blue Sky, I'm Smurf Smoo, SMURF SM00 on Blue Sky. So I'll post updates there.
Perfect. And I'm just taking things one day at a time and trying to survive and keep my animals safe right now, but also recording podcasts and editing. And that is what I can do at this moment. And right now, my cat just bit me because he's in a mood. He's very grumpy from being moved around and evacuated different places. So that is it for Haunted Hollywood Hour this week. Be sure to give us a follow on Instagram at Haunted Hollywood Hour, all one word. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and give us a rating and a review so that other people can find it. And if you want to reach out to us directly and either be on the show sometime, say something, share a spooky story, or request some spooky story that you want talked about on this podcast, email us at hauntedhollywoodhourpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, bye.